Hey guys, I am doing chapter 9 lecture, which is families and children, which is the first chapter that is due for week 12. Week 12 is the week that we will be coming back from spring break, and due to 2 weeks being off, I assigned 2 chapters. So let's get into it because you're going to have 2 videos to watch and I want to try to make them as short as possible. So I am opening the PowerPoint slide, which is going to be chapter 9, families and children, underneath week 12. And I am moving from slide 1 to slide 2, which has the families and children, and it has the family of Modern Family on it, and it says the cultural image of the family. So this chapter is really interesting to me. I mean, just like any other chapter that we've learned and, we've read in for this book, because, it raises questions that you kind of think to yourself, like, I never really thought about that. And the point in this chapter that was that kind of point for me was the question of whether or not a family is a family. Sorry, I'm looking at the chapter. The family is a family if you don't have children. And I thought that was interesting. So, you think about your own kind of expectations and what you assume when you speak to or, see people, and whether or not you consider or call them a family if there is not children involved. So the way they start this chapter, when the celebrity that they get into is Ellen and her wife, Portia, I think is her name, and, about whether or not they're going to have kids and whether they consider themselves a family just because they're just a couple. So that wanted to be one of my first questions to you guys today, is if whether or not you consider a family without children to be a couple that's living in a house without children to be a family. Is that something that you've ever thought about before? If you see a couple, if you're living at your house, for anybody in the class who lives with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whoever, do you consider yourself a family, or are you not gonna consider yourself a family until you have children? So I'm interested in your point of view on that. But moving on from what the book talks about is this cultural image of the family. So that's where we're going from there. So we have also the point of the chapter when they say that although the majority of society would say that a family is not a family until they have children, they also say that I think it was 55% in 2010 would not consider a lesbian couple with children as a family. So there's a kind of disconnect there. Obviously, if you don't see a family as a family, I feel like I've said family so many times already, without children, but then you have the scenario of, okay, to a lesbian couple with children, and 55% still said that's not a family. That's interesting there. So it kind of also adds to that discussion that we had one of the very first weeks of class of how do you define family. So that's basically the focus of this chapter, is the role that children play, not only in the family, but also within marriage. How does producing or getting children, whether it's through adoption, how does that change the dynamic of marriage, change the individual's role in the relationship, and all the different diverse trends that have changed. So the last chapter was more of, all right, so this is the percentage of people who are getting married, this is the percentage of people who are getting divorced, etc., cohabiting, and now this is a focus of the changing of childbearing. All right, so some of the main themes that we go through, and I'm still here on chapter 2 reading some of my notes, is that most U.S. families have 1 to 3 children. 2 is the average, but this is a much lower number than the past. The family size has been in decline for most of the 20th century. There is more single moms, again, something that we've discussed a lot. And there are more and more parents having children outside of marriage. So that's another theme that we're going to get into. And all right, so let's move forward to slide 3. All right, so slide 3, childbearing trends. So again, this is a lot of what is discussed in the beginning part of the chapter, and it relates to the theme of the overall book of diversity, right? So the more and more that these statistics change and there's these different types of families, the more and more diverse our society is becoming. And this is something that I have you guys kind of answering more generally most of the time, but you're going to be doing it more specifically in your next two papers of whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. So I'll give you some examples of that. So about 40% of births are to unmarried women. More and more parents are cohabiting. There are also more and more instances where there are more than two parents, right? So you have step parents. We have step brothers and sisters, siblings, and this is because of more divorces happening and more people cohabiting or living with blended families, etc. And there are much more older parents, and there are more women over 45 who do not have children, right? So that's also interesting. So that reflects these trends that are listed here specifically on the PowerPoint. That more unmarried parents are living together. Although fewer parents are married now through the past, many children are involved with more than two, and then the women of over 45. So I usually, and I'm just sharing this because what I'm going to start doing is, because I don't want my lectures to be that long on video, is like I have like my own written notes from when I, go through the chapter, and then I have the slides. So whatever slides I kind of brush through or that I just skip, I'm going to put those notes for you guys. So when you go over the PowerPoint, you have either my video for that more in-depth discussion or notes on the slide. So once this video is over, you'll know which PowerPoints are gonna have the notes for you. Just obviously open it up and see it. So some terms and concepts, like for example, this is one that I'm gonna slide by. We all kind of know what a parent is. I'm moving on to slide 4. An adult intimately responsible for the care and rearing of a child. I'm curious, is there another version of parenting that you would use when you look up parenting, in a dictionary, or is there another definition out there that you agree with, or is there a more in-depth definition that you have of parenting? Like, do you in your head think that just because someone is responsible, it doesn't mean necessarily that they are a parent, right? But this is more with obviously like everything else in this book from the Cohen definitions and his way of explaining things. So we have the 3 further definitions, and this is discussed on page 321 of biological parents, adoptive parents, and fertility. The main thing that I wanted to pull out from here are the numbers that vary when it comes to fertility rates based on one's income and race, and how a lot of times fertility rates is really reflective of inequality, which is something that we've been seeing a lot in this book overall. And that's kind of the theme that I want you to understand by the time this class is over, is how families are extremely diverse, and because of, inequality, and why one family may be considered low income and then why another family is high income, but not only that kind of on paper differences between the two, but more how does that make the family different, of it being more likely to be a single mom, more likely to end up in a divorce, more likely to be cohabiting, more likely to have 3 to 4 children versus 1 to 2 children. How does that make parents raise their kids differently? And in the long run, how does this make the family institution more positive or negative? So yeah. So we're moving on from slide 4. There's really nothing here that's really needs something for me to really in-depthly explain to you. This is the terms and concepts of what we're going to be discussing more in depth throughout the chapter. All right, so this is a chart that is showing children adopted in the United States from other countries. From the previous slide, we got into the definition of adoption, and this chapter, which I thought was interesting because I didn't know that adoption was so rare. And if you consider, 2% of all U.S. children being adopted rare, but I thought it would be much higher. Also, so of the 2% of all U.S. children being adopted today, and I'm reading these numbers off Cohen, is 37% are adopted through the foster care system, 38% are U.S. born and adopted through private sectors, and with private services, and 25% are born in other countries and adopted by U.S. parents. So I wanted to ask you guys' opinion as they briefly touched upon about the controversy or the different opinions on people adopting and raising children that are, from a different country or out their race. That's something that's that we see a lot with celebrities. I think one of the examples I put up was Sandra Bullock, and I was curious what you guys thought about that. Do you have an opinion on parents, let's say, a white parent adopting a black child? Do you think that that's something that, we shouldn't, I mean, obviously, right, you can't say that's gonna be something that we're gonna not allow, because it's, that's, you're gonna, if anything, in the long run, kind of negatively affect the children, I believe. But do you have a strong opinion on, either a white family raising a black child or a black family raising a white child? I'm interested in your opinion for that. They also get into how international adoption is something that's heavily regulated, and there's actually a convention in the United Nations that addresses this specifically to protect the interests of the children. They want to make sure that before you just automatically take a child to be adopted in another country, that you've exhausted the resources and availabilities of families in another country first. And of course, you don't, and I wonder, and also for the next question of, do you think it's more beneficial? Maybe that, that's the kind of reasoning behind that, of the importance of, let's say a baby raised in a country, being adopted from a country in Africa, being raised in that country because culturally that's where he or she is from and that's where they belong. Being around people that look like you, talk like you, your language, your culture, etc. Or do you think it's better for them to kind of come somewhere like the United States and have other opportunities that they might not get there? What do you guys think? Answer in the comments down below. All right. What else I want to say about adoption? And obviously adoption is another factor and explanation as to, people who are not able to have children on their own, right? So women who are having fertility problems, that's the part of this, that's what this topic is brought up, and primarily in introduction to parents who are unable or unwilling to carry a child on their own, etc. All right, so moving on to slide 6. 12 minutes, not bad. All right, childbearing, percentage of births to unmarried women. So this reflects the trend that I earlier got into, of more and more women over 45 are not having children. I wonder how many of my women in the classroom, and this is a question now, who are, and we've discussed this before, about how, women are having children at later ages because they are getting their education first. I didn't finish getting all my degrees until like my late 20s. They also get into the how education will most likely make you have children much later. Getting a higher career will, progressing in your career and your job, you'll start having children much later. And now, since we've learned from the 1960s, the 70s, 80s, more and more women are on the workforce, and this is kind of the result of that, right? So this is the social change that has taken place because of movements such as the ERA and having more women in the workplace. Is that a positive or a negative? Is that something that you guys think is good for the family, or is it bad? Is it something that's good for society, or is it bad? Is it good for the individual women only? Again, these are things that you are supposed to be thinking of and kind of twisting your thoughts about, and then ultimately writing about it in your next paper. All right, so, and just to have this in kind of a regular sentence. So 1990, it was 28% of women who were not married over the, okay, so 40% of all children born in the United States are born to parents who aren't married, up from 28%. So that's a huge, huge jump. 40% of all children in U.S. versus 28% in 1990 born to unmarried parents. So, all right. So furthermore into the discussion of the diversity of childbearing is these 4 categories that were discussed of unmarried parents, race and ethnicity, education, and economic trends. So the first one of unmarried parents, there are more unmarried parents because they're young adults who are not ready or willing to marry or have children. Right? We are a society that is automatically graduating high school, going to college, getting an apartment, hopefully living with somebody for a little bit. And then, of course, with the last chapter where we had a focus on marriage, why aren't people getting married? Because it's expensive, because we identify ourselves as an individual first and don't feel like we need to get married. A lot of those ideas that we already spoke about in the last chapter. Single older women who decide to have children. So, right, there's women who are waiting for maybe the love of their life to come and it just never happened. And they just decide to have a child on their own much later in life. And then, unfortunately, they're not able to. There's the adoption. And then divorced adults with children. So we have more and more parents getting divorces. Therefore, we have more unmarried parents. So this is a trend that ultimately will affect childbearing, and the chapter later on goes into how and why. What else did I want to say? Oh, okay. So also with the young adults with or without children, these individuals are also going to be more likely to be economically disadvantaged. So just keep that in mind when we speak about like race and economics and how, different ways that families are formed when it comes to marriage and getting a divorce, etc. And then also what we've talked about in chapter 4 with social class. And, all this that we're talking about, all these chapters all end up coming together and relating to each other in so many different ways. And this is one of those where unmarried parents are more likely to be economically disadvantaged, and also said that parents who don't have an education, or the more and more that you have a higher education, the more likely you're going to be married. So you see how that right there relates to each other. But then also it is less likely for minority groups to get married, but we're also more likely to have more and more children. You see that? So it's a lot of different things that we would discuss in these different chapters, these statistics, and relate to these larger discussions that we've had. All right, so moving on to slide 9. Childbearing by race and ethnicity. This is the total fertility rates by race and ethnicity. So like I said before, single parenthood is much more common in some racial and ethnic groups than others. This figure also shows the total fertility rates by race. So this is what is discussed by Cohen, is that Latino women on average have 2.1 children, African Americans have 1.9, and whites, Asians, and American Indians have the fewest. So why is that? This is the point of the class. I would say, what did the book say? And I'm looking for my notes. I do remember that the point about the Latin families always interested me, because not just because I'm Latin, but also because of the relation that it has overall with immigration and economics and education. So because of the religion that Latin families come from, there's this cultural expectation to have a lot of children. Their Latin community is also more likely to have a lower education, and younger and healthier groups are going to be in the Latin community and also more likely be searching for employment. So these are the 3 factors that are discussed in the chapter as to why Latin women are more likely to have a lot more children. So think about that, and where we discussed in the last chapter is if you have a higher education, you're more likely to get married. And if you have a higher education, you're less likely to have more children. And then we have the opposite here with the Latin women are more likely to have a lot of children, and it's related to their lower levels of education, right? So, just another link there. All right. Oh, and also American Indian, African American, and Puerto Rican families are more likely to include single parent households. So, this is the average number of children ever born to women ages 40 to 44. So again, this is in relation to the discussion that globally, women with lower levels of education are going to have more children. So that's, specifically brought up in this chapter a few times. And think about how that also, so if globally, more women with less education having more and more children, and also single mothers are more likely to have a less education, but then also single mothers are more likely to um, be of to be African American, and then all the other inequalities that come with that, right? So we have African American women are less likely to get hired at a job. African American women, as we saw in this chapter, are less likely to get picked on a dating app, right? Less African American women are less likely to have the availability of their specific demographic in their dating pool. So, and then never mind the fact that their partner is more likely to go to jail over another woman's partner. So think about how all of this in the long run ends up changing the family dynamics for certain racial groups over other racial groups, right? For certain classes versus other classes. Women who did not finish high school have an average of 2.8 children. That's higher than the statistic of the Spanish woman before, compared with 1.8 among those with bachelor degrees. So let me say that again. Women who did not finish high school have an average of 2.8 children. Women who did not finish high school, compared with 1.8 or fewer among those with bachelor's degrees. So you got the women who are in my class who are getting their bachelor's. I don't know how many of you guys already have kids, but the fact that you're going for your bachelor's degree, you will most likely, it says 1.8 children versus someone who didn't finish high school having 2.8. Like, that's a huge difference. And then the person who didn't go to high school, what is she gonna most likely not be able to do? Get a high paying job, right? And Cohen says this can be partially explained by the fact that some women who do not go back to school, some women do not go back to school after they have children. So if you're a senior in high school and you end up having a baby, then you end up not going back to school. So that's why that statistic is fit that way. But still. And then so as a result, those women end up having more children, right? So then you leave school and then you end up having more children. All right, so opportunity cost. This is something that is specifically discussed in terms of women, which I think it's interesting. It kind of discusses the overall inequality that we have when it comes to being a mother and working. But this idea, I moved on to slide 11. Opportunity cost. The price one pays for choosing the less lucrative of available options. So many women in the workforce have to choose this. I myself felt that kind of pressure when I was working somewhere, and I swear to God, I know I got pregnant like the month I got hired there, and like it was like a few months later, and I was like, crap, and I was so stressed out. And it's like, I was unfairly stressed out when you think about that, right? Because you're like, you feel guilty because you end up you're having a baby, and you're starting somewhere new, right? So you're automatically thinking about like this business who's like, who would be fine without you, honestly. But about this corporation headed by a male. My boss is a man, so then I had to go into this office and say to him like, oh yeah, like I'm pregnant. And, I'm going to need, and never mind the fact I didn't get any kind of leave because this was a while ago before it was New York, but still, it was difficult for me. And I don't know if anyone, again, here has to relate to that. Let me know. But, for my men in the class, if you think that's something that is unfairly pushed on women, right? Why is it something that when I got pregnant, it's not actually a concern for the father of the baby, but because I'm the one who has to carry baby for 9 months and then physically heal. But anyway, where I'm getting at with opportunity cost. So you have to choose between having your job or getting a promotion or doing something more lucrative in that sense and having children. You might lose your income or earn a lower income. I remember when afterwards I got hired and then I ended up going I ended up going for Danny, and I asked somebody like, do you think I should mention in the job interview that I have a kid? And they're like, just don't bring it up, because you fear that if you say that, they're going to think in their head, well, she's just going to call to work all the time. Right. Which I didn't. All right, so, and this is more likely to be a problem for women with higher education, because this isn't necessarily a problem for women who don't have higher education, because you don't really have that choice to make. Yes, there's a choice regardless, because you have, it doesn't matter what your job is, there's a choice you have to make. Like, do I go work, whether it's in the supermarket and watch my kids, or do I go work, whether it's on Wall Street, and watch my kids. But this discussion is more with this idea of choosing something lucrative in the exact definition of the terms, and having a baby. So that's why Cohen discusses this as something that really applies for women with higher education. Half of all pregnancies are considered unintended, meaning that the woman was not trying to get pregnant. So that's interesting. Half of all pregnancies are unintended. So, say what you want about that. I just think that's interesting. All right, so that's opportunity cost. That's what we mean by that. So what do you guys think about that? Is that something you agree with? You think that's something that men also have to deal with, and they're just being unfairly pushed out of this kind of discussion? Let me know. And finally, childbearing in terms of economic trends, that individuals, we will take into account our economic status, our economic situation before we have children. Yes, that's a huge reason. A lot of times, with all the different reasons that we hear why people don't have kids, one of them is I just can't afford it. Right? That's a big reason why people have abortions, and it's a big reason why we say don't get pregnant at 16. It's not so much like you're not going to be ready at that age emotionally, although that is a part of it, but a lot of it is like economically, how are you going to raise a baby? So at the end of this PowerPoint, I'm not going to get into it in detail, but I'll leave it there for you guys to read. We get into the different amounts that it costs to raise children, and it's astonishing to me because I feel like it's so much lower than what it actually is. And again, this was 2015, so it might be, the numbers are definitely different now. But childbearing parents do show people respond to the economic conditions. And then this part of the chapter discusses how the Great Recession, and think about the time period that, of the age group that was there. So everybody who was in their 20s during the Great Recession, Cohen explains, were able to push off having children. And statistically, that showed that that's what would happen during that time period. But older women didn't have that option, right? Because they would have to, once the recession is over, they'll be much older and unfortunately not be able to have babies. But that option was there for people, and that's why birth rates fell sharply for women underneath the age of 30 during this time period. I hear he's watching CNN upstairs, and I just hear the president screaming. All right. So this is right here. Unmarried parents, race, ethnicity, education, economic trends. These are the 4 different patterns that I just went over with you guys. All right, so why not have children? Why not have children? I might, just because of where we are time-wise, I'm going to leave this up here for you guys and leave the notes there. But this is the part of the chapter that was interesting because we discussed so much, why do you have children? So consciously and unconsciously, people have children for many different reasons. If anybody in the audience wants to give me your reason at 28 minutes, why do you want to have children and why don't you want to have children? Can you guys let me know? Do you feel like sharing that? Is there anybody who's just kind of like, I do not want to have kids at all. I don't care. It's not for me. Is there anybody who's like, can't wait? Tell me all that. I want to hear I want to hear basically everybody answer me this question, because I want to see how much of it relates to what Cohen says and if any of it, if he missed anything. So is there any reason as to why you want to have kids or don't want to have kids that wasn't discussed here? Is there anything that's holding you back? He didn't talk about global pandemics in this chapter. That's a big reason why I'm sure people, imagine getting pregnant, being pregnant now and having to go to the hospital, or getting pregnant now and being scared of giving birth next January. Talk to me. What do you think? How don't you want to have kids, and why do you want to have kids? All right, so why not have children? So for this chapter gets into, and I write so many notes and then I don't read them, and that's why I get mad. So I'm like, why do I write these notes and then I waste my time? So why did we have children? All right, so poor people, as we discussed this in chapter 2, we had the people who were having children for economic gain, right? They were considered for a source of labor. And then versus rich families where it wasn't necessarily gain, but it was a source to be able to pass down your inheritance and, right, this like source of pride. And then they go to this more historical analysis of children getting killed by trains and, child labor, and how, more and more with the increase of more and more child safety laws and the increase of more and more laws, period. So, there were less children dying in accidents, and there were less children working, and their children were living later and not dying at such a young age. So in his agricultural settings, it was more about labor, and then also they were there to protect and help their parents when they get older. So this started to change as time went on, and parents were more now seeing children as less as an economic gain and more of an emotional gain. Let me see, did I put this on a slide or... Sorry. I thought I put that in a slide, but yeah, that's kind of the term that I want you to remember when it comes to that. Oh, you know what I'm doing? Okay. So, all right. So emotional gain versus economic gain. So remember that point. And also, right, children nowadays, these days, is a really huge expense, which we also get into later. So we're at 30 minutes. I'm gonna try to go past this, but all right, so abortion. This is a discussion of abortion rates. So boom, big question at 30 minutes. I want to hear your opinions on it. So along with the why or why not do you have kids, I also want to hear your opinion on this. Do you agree with abortion? I want that debate back and forth between all you guys. Like I said, everything is due the week after this is posted, but you have the whole semester to kind of finish this discussion. But I want to hear your opinions on why not you want to have children and abortion. Listen to the stats. Among women ages 15 to 44 years old, those who were not married were less than half, this is like confusing, were less than half as likely to have birth as married women, but about 4 times as likely to have an abortion. Okay, I'll try to say it again. So women in 2014 between 15 and 44 are about 4 times as likely to have an abortion when compared to married women. And they were also less than half as likely to give birth. So that's a little confusing, but it's in the chapter. Another stat, Black women are more likely to have abortions. So that's something that we've kind of, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people already know that. There's a lot of economic reasons for that, social reasons for that. So I'm wondering, specifically for my students, my students who are African American, how do you feel about that? Knowing that this stat is there of Black women being more likely to have abortions. Does that kind of change your opinion sometimes as a person of color if you know that your specific group is in that higher range? Or do you understand? I want to hear all your different opinions on that. And also, these are the groups of women, and I'm saying all this really because I want you guys to write this down, or this video is here for you to go back to. These are the groups of women that are most likely to have unintended pregnancies and therefore lead to abortion. Single or cohabiting women, those with low incomes or education, and then the third is Black women. So just think about how that overlates again to everything we've spoken about. I mean, we spoke about cohabitation, we spoke about social class and income, and these are the people we spoke about race, and these are the groups that are most likely to have abortions. And it's so interesting because with them being the groups that are more likely to have abortions, they're still the groups that end up having more children. Isn't that so interesting? So the book goes into the different reasons as to why people have abortions. We know why. We've gone over it so many times, just in life and in debates. And right now, the huge debate that's going on, I want to put up the kind of pros and cons link on here. So I'll put that up for you guys. But let me know what you think about that. All right. So slide 16. Why not have children? Infertility. So again, I'm going to kind of fly through this. I'll leave this for my notes for you guys to go through. But I just want to go to, again, back with the inequality point. There are many causes of infertility, including advanced age, poor health, smoking, and obesity. Social conditions contribute to infertility, and the higher rates of fertility are attributed to lower education and lower overall poor health. White women are the least likely to experience infertility. Women with higher levels of education have lower rates of infertility. And in the past, women tend to be blamed for infertility. So again, and I didn't say the definition, but it's there for you guys. These are things that relate to what we spoke about with all the different inequalities that are there for all these different demographics, women, color, class, right? So, and it's also interesting, this part of the chapter, when they go into the historical shame that women who have infertility deal with, as if it's their fault, as if they did something wrong, right? The stigma. And then think about, if that's something that is attributed to women who are infertile, the other problems that come along with that, specifically to the groups of women who are more likely to have that, right? And all the other issues that leads to that we've discussed in this book. Getting a job, having a family, just anxiety, depression, income, etc. All right, so... Oh, and what I wanted to bring up, I think I brought it up here, is what's going on now with COVID is so interesting to me about, and I think I want to put up an article for it. How am I already at 35 minutes? Jesus. Of how now, like, the majority of people who are dying from COVID are African American and Latino. Think about how that relates to what we're talking about, of Latin and African American people being more likely to have abortions, being more likely to be infertile, be more likely to not have an education. All these social issues relate to specific groups in so many different ways, and COVID is just another example of that. It is insane how it all relates to each other. And later on, let me know what you guys think about that. I made a note to bring it up to that because that's what it relates to. All right, why not have children child-free? Are you childless or child-free? What do you guys think? I'm sure people who don't want kids, you'll be like, child-free. And those who want to have kids, and it's like, right now I'm childless. So that's kind of the difference between the two, as Cohen explains it. So those who experience infertility are childless, and those who choose not to have children are child-free. In 1960s, 70% of people in their late 20s were living with one of their own children. Let me say it again. In 1960, 70% of people in their late 20s had children. That's crazy. Think about your guys' age. By 2015, that fallen to 27%. So think about that. Children's living arrangements. This is something I'm going to go through too. I will leave the notes there for you to have a more in-depth reading, because I know you guys have chapter 10 after this, and I don't want you to have 2 long videos to watch. I try, guys. I really try to fly these. But all right, yeah. And here again, you see racial differences between how children are living. How many children? Of course, as one could suspect, white children have the more consistent living arrangements, and then you see that black children having the lowest, and then Latin children towards the middle. It's interesting that data for Latinos were not available before 1980. So and think about how this relates to diversity, social change, and inequality. This is the percentage of all children living with a grandparent. And all right, this is what I was rushing to get to. Parenting. These are the broad categories of skills or resources that parents bring to parenting, at least what they should bring when it comes to parenting, all right? Socialization, social bonds, and social networks, the activity of raising a child. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and this is all on page 340. So we discussed socialization in terms of gender and how your parents socialize you to be a certain way. So that's basically what this is saying. It's just more broader, right? So these are broad categories that we're getting into. The definitions here are very not specific. I'll leave my notes here for you guys. But the reason why I'm getting really in depth here, because I know for the discussion board post is kind of another trick question that I asked you guys just to see how in depth you did this reading. But this is not the answer to the discussion board post. If you did put this, I'll give you partial credit. But the actual right answer is coming up. But these are broad categories of skills. And the question that I ask has a specific part of the chapter that is listed. So I'm interested to see how many of you guys got that right. But yeah, so socialization, you learn how to act in certain situations, right? And then when people don't reciprocate that to you, there's a sense of stress and uncertainties, right? So like kind of with the social scripts, right? You go to school, you sit down, you meet people, you shake their hand. Now we're in that place right now, right? We've been socialized. You see people, you kiss, you hug. it's weird now, right? You see, you hold the door for them, you shake hands. This is things that we've been socialized into us. And when it's not like that, when it's not what you're used to, you feel, and that's what they mean by here, in social situations you feel confusion, you feel stress. Social bonds, the foundation for learning and development. This is what your first bond is with your parents, right? So that's the foundation of what comes next, which are your social networks, right? Which is relationships with other people. But the foundation of those networks, relationships with other people, is the bond that you form with your parents. So if you have a toxic relationship with your parents, you're most likely, I don't want to say that as if I'm like some kind of expert, but they say that you will most likely maybe have a toxic relationship with other people, right? Your relationship with your parents is that foundation. At least that's what this is saying here. You hear a lot of times people be like, oh, she has daddy issues. Oh, okay, so she has issues with men. He's a mama's boy. Oh, he's gonna be, I don't know, whatever, with his girlfriend. You guys know what I mean. I'm flying by this. I'm sorry. I'm trying to give you a short video. All right, so discussion board post. What you've been waiting for, 40 minutes. According to Cohen, there are 3 aspects of parenting that have proven beneficial when it comes to 3 major dimensions of children's success. What are those 3 aspects? So if you go to page 350, this exact question is this thing. So I know a lot of people probably stopped at the 3 other 3, but this is the actual answer to the question. Supportiveness, monitoring, and discipline. And so these are 3 aspects of parenting that have been proven beneficial, which I put them in blue and blue. And then the 3 major dimensions of success: being happy and well-adjusted, doing well in school, staying out of trouble. I mean, if you think about it, when you're a parent, what are your kind of goals, right? I mean, being happy, you're happy, healthy. Then it's like school's your goal of doing good in school and not staying in trouble, right? That might differ for people, different races, different classes, more important than the other, right? But nonetheless, they're consistent when it comes to parenting. So so if you just go back to page 350, you'll see this itemized and discussed more with Cohen. So that's the answer to the discussion board post. And finally, I'm going to, this is a little bit more in depth when it comes to parenting. The one I want to get into and the ones that I don't get into, I'll put the notes up for you. So I'm on slide 26, going past. I kind of got into this a little bit before though, about how the meaning of childhood has changed and it relates to our chapter 2 discussion. Competition and security. The more and more that children were seen as emotionally something that we're attached to, there's more and more, and but now there's also more education. We're spending more money on our kids. That's what this is relating to. But it's more related to, at least in the discussion of Cohen, of this idea of an intensive motherhood and how this is cultural pressure on women to devote more resources than men. So, I mean, I deal with that every day. I feel like, especially now with homeschooling, I'm teaching, I'm working for Danny, I'm homeschooling my daughter. And then when I'm done with work, it's like I have to boom, turn on, be mom. Then I have to turn on the other thing and be wife. Then boom, my mom's next door. I have to be her daughter. If I don't call her for 2 days, it's a problem. You know what I mean? So that's what they mean by here with this cultural pressure that women, we have to devote more of our resources, whether that resource is time, energy, or money, versus others. However, the term has changed to intensive parenting. So here at 43 minutes, what do you guys think about that? Is that something true? Do you think it's fair that they changed the term to intensive parenting versus intensive motherhood, because it's not only the moms who deal with this stress? And that's where we're gonna go to, I'm sorry, I'm skipping slide 30. So I'm skipping to slide 30. So once you guys get there, I'll give you a few seconds. That's where we get to this male provider ideal versus the involved father ideal. Of it used to be, right, when we were learning about the separate spheres and men, and their only importance, and some of you guys agree with this, in the family was their was economically, right? The only thing that they were worth of value was their economic standing and able to provide for their family. And although a lot of times we said that was negative for the women because that makes the woman less powerful, there's also seen that this was, right, what we learned in the chapter with, I think it was sexuality or gender, of the issues with masculinity and how we put these expectations on men and how that can be negative for them as well and for the children, because the children need not only love from their mom but from their father as well. So we see here the discussion of how it's men's roles are changing, and it's better for the children, not just for the women, not just for the man, but for the children as well. So in the past, parenting research has mostly focused on mothers, and also just to bring up, this whole chapter discusses how it's only been focused on heterosexual couples, and there's very little data on how all of this applies to gay couples. So keep that in mind. But yeah, so I mean, what do you guys think about that? How the shifting attitude of what a good father is. So think about now, if you have a father, right? We see all those stories all the time. My father was never home. He always worked. But back then, that's what a good dad was. But now that's not enough, right? The idea of a good father is the involved father ideal. And versus what it used to be was just him being a male provider. That's just something what I wanted to get into. And then I put a quote here about how the increase in women's employment has changed the cultural views of fathers, which is basically what I was just explaining to you guys. So that's some of the main things out of this chapter that I want to pull out. For everything that I didn't touch upon, I will leave the notes here for you to read. And I know I'm doing these moves. And then I have a next slide. Let me see if there's, and then if you just go back to slide 29, I wanted to hear your opinions on this. So if you want to answer down below, what is this, 46 minutes? Jesus, I try. All right, the next video, I'm going to make it faster. I swear, guys, I swear. What do you think about spanking? We're on slide 29. Tell me what you think. I want to hear your opinion on that. And this is the chart. And all right, so yeah, I didn't skip that much. All right, so let me guys know what you guys think. Do you guys like when I leave it to 45 minutes? I'm sorry for anyone who really wants me to, if there's anything here that you want me to discuss in a video, I will do that. So comment, let me know. And all right, next video is coming up for chapter 10.